Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Oh, good, everyone's showing up. We'll just wait, give it a minute or two before we start. Let everyone rock up. Hello. Yeah, give it like a minute, see if anyone else is going to pop in, and we'll get it all started. Esteban, are you recording again?
Yeah, he said he is. Loads of people came in and came out, and there's some people that never joined before. So do you want to explain how the stage works?
Yes, I will.
Right.
Again, I'll give it another 30 seconds. We can just all sit here intimately for the time being. Do you know what? Do you know what? They'll show up. I know the whole music is very good, isn't it? I do like it. I'll be devastated if they change it. But yes, while we're all here, I think pretty much everyone has been in one before, but just so we can go through it again, it's the same formula. We'll start talking about it, and then if you've got something to say, raise your hand, and we can let you in on the stage, and you can stay on the stage, just mute yourself when other people are talking and whatnot. Or if you do just want to stay in the audience for the time being, you can literally just stay in the audience and listen. It doesn't matter. You can stay in the audience for the whole time if you want. You don't have to say anything if you don't want.
I think someone's already walking in to speak. Or
Where?
is it no? I swear to God, I saw it. Oh, well, I didn't. It was a mistake.
But yeah, it's literally that. Hi, Trevor. It's just a case of if you want to come join us on the stage, raise your hand. We'll let you in. You can stay on there. If you just want to stay in the audience and just listen, you can do that. So we can kickstart it. So following last month's conversation on Faulkner, it was just a coincidence that we did happen to pick something which started off about the death of a mother. There wasn't any kind of thematic connection between the two. It was just a happy coincidence. Uh, and the other coincidence was that out of all of the books that we've chosen for this year, this and the previous one, Faulkner and this, were actually the only two that I haven't read. Everything else I've read, I'm familiar with. This was the only other one. I've read Camus' other work, not all of it, but I've read Sisyphus. But I haven't read this. Louisa's a lot more familiar with it than I am. So, do you want to start or should I?
Um, I am actually curious to hear your first impressions of the novel.
Okay,
Well, I'll call it a novella
okay,
because it's so short.
okay. Well, it was quite interesting because as I was reading it, and I'm familiar with Camus and to some degree the perception of what this novel has. As I was reading it, I mean, it's incredibly short, but for the first two chapters, I just assumed, okay, what this is going to be is going to be a classic French existentialist novel, and I thought that it was essentially going to be a novel similar in tone and atmosphere to, say, an Antonioni piece.
It's like a
Yeah,
meandering, yeah.
meandering, wandering, and the whole point of it is that everything is meaningless and there's no point, which, funnily enough, does become the crux of the novel. However, I was pleasantly surprised by it because typically, the Jack Kerouac kind of beatnik thing, I'm not entirely into. And funnily enough, when I was young, J.D. Salinger, Catcher in the Rye, was my favorite novel for a time, and now it seems so juvenile to me. And looking at works such as like, okay, everything is meaningless, it would require a lot for it for me to be
Yeah.
interested in it. But for the first part, I was like, okay, I'm pleasantly surprised. I'm enjoying the writing, and it feels like an
It's very.
interesting perspective because it feels as though everything that's happening with this man, he's just having things enacted upon him. He doesn't seem to have any agency of himself. And then, almost halfway through the novel, like almost at the exact halfway point, the entire novel shifts and a murder occurs. And it seems a murder that's so avoidable. It seems something that it is so, it seems like so out of the, in many ways, out of the trajectory of what the character is going to do, but at the same way, because it does seem as though there is this meaninglessness towards the character. It seems as though the action that he takes is just an action that's neither good nor bad, and whatever happens is going to happen. And then the second half of it's just it's a continuation of this character, which is almost an empty shell who's just accepting fate being thrust upon him. And
Okay.
funnily enough, after all this, yes, there is a meaninglessness in everything, but I was incredibly surprised by the novel in the fact that It's an optimistic novel. I was
Oh,
I was
okay.
incredibly surprised that this is an existential, borderline nihilistic perspective that can offer warmth to people. George, I'll let you in, but I know Louise is going to say something, and then George, I'll bring you in.
Yeah, I'm actually intrigued that you thought. Okay, so I read this novel a couple of times in my life during different stages, and is an interesting novel to read from time to time because I do think that I actually I know exactly why you feel like that the things are being enacted upon the character because just the way that how complacent he is with everything and how his tone is almost I think especially in the first half he's very neutral about things. Like he describes things but he doesn't feel nothing feels like he affects him in an emotional level,
Yeah.
right? And I my vision of it now is that part one is just an excuse for Camus to just really go on his about his philosophy on part
Yes.
two.
Yeah.
Part two is where the novel really happens. Novella really happens to me.
Well,
For me,
it,
yeah.
it changes the entire context of the first
Yeah.
part because I was anticipating that the novella was going to be this, and I thought, well, it's in two parts. I'm not entirely sure why, and then the entire context of it changes in the second part. Uh,
Bring George on,
yeah,
yeah.
George, I'll bring you in, but also just because other people have joined as well. I'll reiterate what I said at the beginning. You can stay in the audience if you want, or you can come on stage and join in. It's up to you. Like
Yeah.
it's just an open forum for everyone. So, George, I'll bring you in.
Hi.
Thank you for bringing me in. So yeah, this book, big meanings to be. It means a lot to me. So I'm so excited to talk about it today. But yeah,
Mm.
like like I'm not necessarily like the best read guy in the world, but I can imagine someone who's not very familiar with like literature or whatever picking up this book and thinking, "Oh, this is boring. There's nothing happening," and then the transition from the first half to the second half when and Merceau kills the Arab, the uh, the Algerian, like everything changes, and it's like, yeah, it just seemed like for the first half, it just seemed like a guy's life happening that's not very interesting. But when you like reach the second part, you finally this really clicked for me this time reading it because like this is a life where this is what happens. You don't try to find meaning in your life. You just become a blank slate, and like your mom can die and that doesn't mean a thing. You can have a girlfriend and that doesn't mean a thing. You can kill some random Arab and that doesn't mean a thing. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And like that boredom, so-called boredom, becomes like sort of genius really.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I agree with you, Louis. With the idea that the novel is actually hopeful, it's actually optimistic because just especially because of like some of the things happening in my life now. Not going to go into detail, but yeah, sometimes like I have it reminds me that I have no other option than just find meaning with like within all this bullshit. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that what really struck me about the novel was the idea that when you're approached with any piece of art that is existentialist or the crux of it is everything is meaningless. I mean, literally, like the final chapter just sounds like it's Merceau talking to the chaplain, but it's ultimately Camus talking to the world, really, isn't it? It's Camus
Yeah.
talking to everyone that's reading it, and
exactly.
I find that this idea it really feels antithetical to every other existentialist piece of art that is made of a certain ilk because he comes at the end and this adulation, this anticipation that wouldn't it be great that upon his execution everyone approaches him with hatred because that's how just things are supposed to be, and there is no that like the world that we live in is inhabited by obvious answers. There's no great mystery to anything. Things just are. And I think the fact that through this meaninglessness, through, he's very attracted to Marie and this idea that when he's going to die, everyone else is going to carry on living and that she might find someone like a new Merceau, as he describes it.
Yeah.
There is a sense of serenity in it that, you know what? To some degree, it answers a great metaphysical question. Why are we here? What's the purpose of all this? If that answer is there is none, it's still an answer.
I feel that's the idea of absurdity in the book is that things are enacted upon you and life goes on beyond you, and basically like the universe is indifferent towards you. But in a way, I do think that Camus is proposing that the meaning of life in some absurd way is also that there is no meaning, that things just happen and you can just also be inconsequently like living through life, like navigating through life, because even if you do make choices or you don't make choices, things are going to happen upon you. Yeah, I don't necessarily think that he is making a big argument for meaning in itself and finding meaning. I think he is actually making the argument that because there is no meaning, it is full in itself. Like the fact that existence is convoluted, the fact that existence is absurd is enough meaning. Yeah, that's what like my second, like third, fourth reading of it is.
Yeah. Paul just put, to me, Camus' philosophy is about finding beauty in a comedically large pile of trash.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, that's from my previous readings of his, of, you know, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. It's a form of philosophy. It's an interesting foundation. Sorry, an interesting framework that he builds his philosophy upon. Because most of the time, you know, existentialist philosophy, it would be that we are in a comedically large pile of trash, and so you would then look to say an accelerationist perspective, because we must destroy it precisely because it's meaningless. But he uses pain, he uses suffering, he uses emptiness as a form of hope.
But I would make a distinction between his philosophy of absurdism and existentialism, because there is a distinction.
Yes,
like I don't think we can frame him up with existentialism in itself. Like I think because as Paul mentioned on the chat now, there's this idea of finding beauty. There's this comedy aspect of life, like this. At least for me, like when you see classic works of existentialism, a lot of it is a drag, right?
Yes,
yeah. And I don't see that in Camus, although he does talk about indifference and he does talk about the idea of the universe being indifferent to us. I still think that there is a level of just the randomness of things and the way things happen, even in the way, like just between part 1 and part 2, in the way that fight is so avoidable. Everything that happens is so avoidable.
With the Arabs.
Yeah, with the Arabs, yeah. And what I find more interesting structurally in the book, and I want to see if everyone thought about that too, especially after reading again older, is this idea of like one individual and the systems around that individual. Like you have the judicial system, you have obviously the chaplain coming from like a religious perspective, you have marriage, which is brought upon, which is talked about many times. All those systems that we create to find meaning within our seemingly absurd life. I mean, and one of the reasons I bring that up is because I think that the fact of the mother opening the story, and in a way towards the end as well, they talk about the idea of like what he feels about his mother. That is one of the things that they bring up.
Yeah.
Right, on part 2, like they don't understand why he doesn't feel anything for it. It's this idea is almost like it's so random that your mother is your mother, and then because of the systems of society and what we created, it means more than it is. Like that, there's a level of the absurdity of like in this mass expanse of universe. You know what I mean? There's this little person that is supposed to mean so much.
Would you know what I think with that? I think because part 2, it's made up a lot of institutional figures and figures of authority. We have the priest, we have everyone in the courts, and what's interesting to me is because in part 1 it's a first person novel, so in part 1 we get the internal world of what's going on with him as he's experiencing the grief of his mother's death, as he's wandering the city, as he meets the I can't remember, the guy with the dog and whatnot, and he's hanging around with Marie and Raymond, and they're all as empty as one another, but they don't necessarily feel out of place. I mean, what's interesting with the parallel with when he encounters the authority figures like the lawyers and whatnot, the whole perspective is, he says at one point, it's essentially as though he's on trial for not crying at his mother's death.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they speak to him about is, here is a man who didn't cry at his mother's funeral, who went to see a comedy film after, who was smoking and laughing and everything like that. And there is also this idea of, you know, society, the face of society, the veneer of society, the decorum that we're supposed to have is this preset thing, as though there is an objective, correct morality in which we're all supposed to enact. We're all supposed to enact within certain, what would you say, like the certain stages of life. When your mother dies, you're supposed to physically weep to present to the world that you are upset, to present to the world. You're not supposed to go see a comedy film. You're in grief.
Yeah.
And the only things that really matter to are the physical sensations of the world. I mean, the sun is brought up all throughout the novel. And yet, when we understand, when we followed him through the first part and we realize, yeah, he really doesn't feel anything, it's simply because he doesn't feel anything. There's nothing great. What's the correct way that a person is supposed to grieve over their mother? Are they supposed to stop because someone's mother died? It's a very confrontational novel in that sense, because there is, to a degree, like a removal of sentimentality, because yes, by the end it's like, yes, one person's mother died, everyone else in the world is going to continue to live, an execution is going to happen, everyone should go and watch the execution, it doesn't matter ultimately. And I think that this how would you say, it's like a balance between, like, I find that, funnily enough, I think a lot of the novels that we've read, it's been like this balance between like the metaphysical and the material world.
Yeah.
Just coincidentally, a lot of what we've read about, either that or we just happen to be reading into it because that's what we're interested in.
Yeah.
But I find it very interesting that because we understand his internal world, and it feels so natural for him to have this perspective of, yeah, like he's going around, his mother died and he doesn't feel anything about it. And you do start to question the system of, yeah, but it doesn't matter that he didn't cry at his mother's death. That's what this individual is.
There is this sense of like the contrast between the individual, the world of the individual and the world that we create to kind of make sense of each other, right?
Yeah.
Because this is one of the things that I got the most this time, is the absurd contrast between the internal world and what we actually feel when we are sincere and honest to ourselves, and the world outside of the mind, the body, even the experiences that we feel.
Well, I think
I agree with Tyler, actually, because he says not to inject the Bible and Christianity into every single discussion, but this question is regarding the subject of meaning and ultimate purpose is not new at all. Yeah,
of course.
I mean, I always look back, and there's many points of the book in which I, as a Christian, would disagree, but at the same time I always feel like I'm so drawn to stories like this. I'm so drawn to characters like this. And I said to you in the middle, when you're reading in the couch, I said I don't think Camus wrote with the mindset that this character might even be like a diagnosable psychopath. Not in the sense that he was a psychopath like, haha, I'm evil, but in the sense of like not feeling anything, like a spectrum of how much empathy you actually feel. But I think there is towards the end, like, and I don't want to just skip through so much, but I do think the end scene is so important to really, really, really nailing Morceau and really understanding his character, because there's a level of like acceptance of the inevitability of that what's gonna happen to him that makes him almost elated.
Yeah.
At least that's how I.
Well, because again, there's a definitive answer to it. Like, his belief is a completely also atheistic belief, Marceau, because he says, like, he says that yes, he believes that there is no life after death. He believes that this is it, but there is incredible comfort in that, because I mean, funnily enough, the same way that the chaplain, that the religious man has a concrete belief in his, he also shares. They just happen to be antithetical to one another. And what I find interesting about it is that, yeah, these ideas in the novel aren't completely unique in and of themselves of what is the grand purpose between the ultimate purpose.
This is the question of questions, isn't it?
I think what the novel succeeds in the execution is understanding that within our interpersonal relationships with one another, there's always going to be some degree of a performative aspect.
Yeah.
The thing that you believe in, you try and perform it in a certain regard so that someone listening to you actually understands that, so that the person listening to you can recognize you for what you are, in the same way that, you know, monkeys would smile to show that they're not a threat. We just have this on a more nuanced level to try and get across our ideologies or our beliefs. But I think what the novel explores is this idea of what if we actually encounter a person that does not have that performative aspect, and yet at the same time is completely true to what they believe. By not performing, he's also showing the lack of what is inside of him. And at the same time, that is a truth, and it's a truth which he's completely content with.
Yeah, and in a way, Jay just corrected me. Yeah, in fact, sociopath, not psychopath. There's even a point in the book that they bring that up to him at some point. I like because he said he didn't intend it to kill; it just happened.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of also Camus' idea of things just happening to you, and maybe even decisions that you just do. This is absolutely not how I live my life, and I know most people here, it's not how we live our lives. But there is something interesting in this perspective that is so radical, even if it's trying not to be, even if it's trying to be like the waves, like go. It is radical in a way. Jay.
I'll bring Jay in now.
So he's in Portland, and he came and joined anyway.
He's coming. Should be coming.
Yeah,
sorry, I didn't see the invite. I'm on the phone. Yeah, I think I need to quickly mention that I read it before multiple times. It's my fourth or third read. And on the first one, when I read it before, I was kind of relatable. I kind of relate to the character a bit. And now it changed a lot. And I was thinking that before I used to be like, oh, yes, I just follow the freaking flow of life. I just go and it takes you whatever, and then stuff happens to you and you just should go and embrace it, and it's cool and you don't have to think. I used to be like that a lot. And also with the whole mother dying, it was quite relatable to me that I would expect something like this to happen to me as well. So there was a lot on my first read that I used to relate. And now after all these years, I'm reading it like, oh, I was it was really bad. Like it's good that I got out of that and I'm a new person, and it's really interesting to read it after the years. And it was yeah, regarding to what like living like this, it's not good. Like it okay to live life, to lead you here and there, but you have to make decisions and take the not control, but not to be complicit and or conform with other people pushing you around and making other people decisions for you, right? Like there's a whole meaning and all their stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I also feel the same. Like when I read it first time when I was younger, I felt so close to the character, and now I feel so alien to the character. Like it's I feel like I also grew more sentimental with age.
Yeah. I think it's quite similar to me. Yeah, I really agree. Because also it's decent. I just look at the characters, juvenile, not emotionally developed version of me. Like I could see like when I was a teenager, I was also not emotionally developed. Like, oh, it's just me. I don't know how to deal with my emotions. And just, I don't know if it's spoiler or not, but because if I disconnect later, the idea of the murder, the first part of the book for me explains how he just lets people do stuff, but he's kind of selfish enough to not care, not to deal with emotions. It's only physical. It's only like, oh, it's something happened. I just feel not my emotions and not my mother death or how people treat the dog or how the friend treats whatever anybody else. He just feels just physical sensations a bit, and he suppresses everything else. So all of this in the first part of the book accumulates to some point where he cannot fucking handle it, and he's like explodes and murders the guy like shooting 4 times. And the whole second part of the book takes him through the trial where he cannot deal with it. He's like, I don't understand why I'm being trialed. I kind of just did it. It did happen. Why is it trying to say that I'm a psychopath? It also accumulates for the second part of the book, and he explodes at the priest or whatever's the name of the person. And then he's like, oh, now content. I exploded 2 times. Now I'm a clean state. Let's go again. I'm ready. Like at the end, he says, like, I'm happy. I'm ready for the whatever happens. And I used to think when I was a child, I was like, oh, this is how you be happy. This is how you fulfill life. You just before death, you need to accept the absurdity. But it's not. He just happened to be accepting that because he was at the state where he just screamed all his emotions out. And he's like, oh, I'm ready for whatever going to come. Okay, I exploded all my emotions. I'm going to go back to just listening probably.
George.
That's a good point. Yeah, go on, George.
Yeah, I think like maybe like his lack of sensitivity around the world. Like for me, I don't care much. Like if he didn't cry at his mother's funeral, maybe he had a bad relationship with her. But like I think like lack of sensibility is a sign of immaturity, emotional immaturity. Paul said on the chat that I feel like most men unlock empathy when they turn 30, and maybe that is true. Like I said, I think the older you get, the more sensitive I get. Or, no, the older I get, more sensitive I get. But that's not the case with everybody. I feel like being adulter is made like hardening up, but it's more complex than that. Like I think the character of Merceau is definitely someone that is immature. I will say that.
Yeah, it's interesting because the diorama just brought that he is the anti-underground man, and I was literally about to say after Jay that I feel like Camus is the opposite of Dostoevsky. Like, and because we read the Underground Man right in the beginning of like the proto book club, this is such a good mirror. Like the books are so opposite. Like the two novellas are so opposite of each other, and even in the structure they have a similarity to it. Yeah, I felt the same thing, to be honest. And I do find, because you said earlier, and you even said to me after earlier as well, that this is like almost like a more mature Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah. I
I feel, yeah.
Because again, it's like you say, Catcher in the Rye is existentialist, and we wander around, and there's parallels between the two because J.D. Salinger's character, what's his name? Holden? Is it Holden? Someone's going to correct me but I believe it's Holden. Yeah, Holden Caulfield. Yeah. He is like, again, I read that when I was young, and I was like, oh, yo, this is the way I'm gonna be a beatnik. I'm gonna snap my fingers everywhere. I'm gonna go to hotel rooms because like life's just like crazy and weird like that. You got to roll with the punches in the University of Hard Knocks, and it's like, you don't really have that level of edge that when something really blunt shows up, you can't recognize it. And I think this has elements of that in the character, and I think that there's actually one element of this novel where I cringe a bit reading it, funnily enough. And it's
talk about Catcher in the Rye, talk about The Stranger.
No, I'm talking about yeah. Well, actually, because the translation, it can mean the stranger, it can mean the outsider.
The outsider, yeah.
Yeah, but it's like fucking you know that scene where the fight occurs. It, like literally at the beginning where he goes into the guy's apartment with the dog. And they start talking everything, and then a fight occurs, and it happens out of nowhere, and it is an element that it is, the world enacting itself upon him because he's passive and he just goes and rolls with the punches, literally. There is a moment where I'm reading it, and at the same time I'm thinking, okay,
this is part one.
Yeah, this is part one, chapter 3. And there is a part where I'm reading it, and I think, do you know what? This feels really like a self-insert from an author, because no one so deeply writes a character like Merceau with such a revelation at the end, which is really espousing Camus' philosophy, without a lot of Camus within Merceau himself. Yeah? And then there's the moment where the fight occurs, and it's like he gets hit by him, and then he's on top of him, and he's beating him, and then he beats him in the fight, and then goes back to sitting down. It feels as though, okay, this is supposed to be a cool moment, that this intellectual guy is also able to physically overcome this like working class rough guy.
Brutish, yeah.
But at the same time, he's so cool about it because I just do this and I don't even feel anything, and then I move on to something new. I hear that and I think, this is like J.D. Salinger territory here, because this is someone that's like, oh yeah, we just go about it. I don't even feel anything about this, When I get angry, I just see red, but then I just move on. And it's that element of the novel where I feel as though there is an immaturity to it. Or I don't think it redeems the scene, but I think in total it is a slightly mature Catcher in the Rye, because at the very least, it's offering something. It's offering some solution, even if that solution is, acceptance, content in the absurdity. Whereas Catcher in the Rye just goes and then ends, and existentialism is just, you could reach antinatalism with existentialism. Whereas with Camus' absurdity, it's a case of, no, we must find happiness in that meaninglessness.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I also agree that I think Morceau, in a way, is a self-insert from Camus from top to bottom. I do think that he's talking about himself, even in the aspect of, like, the idea of, as Paul brought it up again as well, the idea of l'étranger as almost, like, as a foreigner, as an outsider, because I think that the translation to outsider encapsulates all meanings that l'étranger actually has.
Yeah.
of like who he actually is. And even I just checked now on Wikipedia really quick, but Camus was French Algerian and his parents were Pied Noir, which is there was like a stigma to that in like between that and French people at the time.
Yeah.
So there is an element of, I wouldn't say race, but there is an element of a foreigner as well into the Paul said, yeah, exactly, like a foreigner into that. And even when a French person uses the term étranger, like it's like a bit like can be quite racially motivated.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think that in a sense he did insert himself in the character. I don't know necessarily if he wrote it thinking this is going to be a cool scene. Like
no, I don't think that he wrote
even
it
subconsciously.
I don't think he wrote it thinking that it's a cool scene, but it felt like even if subconsciously, I think the fact that, you know, putting yourself in there, how would I word this? If I were to do a self-insert for myself inside something, I couldn't imagine myself writing a scene wherein I am beating someone up emotionally and then just casually sit down after. I would feel like too self-aware to be like, I'm not criticizing.
This is not how a fight works either.
Yeah. I'm not criticizing myself enough here. I don't know. There's a passivity in his philosophy, and yet at the same time, there's still a power play there in which, you know, there's dominance within it.
Well, but that's where I think the ending comes to play again. The idea that he's almost...
He asserts dominance, though. He asserts dominance at the end as well.
He does, yeah. But even this idea that he wants people to be aggressively upset of, like, you know, coming to see and all of that. And there's a level of elation that comes from that into knowing that he's going to be beheaded, right? And because ultimately, even within absurditist framework... He still needs to acknowledge that there is not just our own will. Even if we choose to be indifferent to the world and to the universe and even to the meaning of our own life, people are still going to be trying to find meaning about their lives, and that's why we have those systems. That's why we have those solutions for meaning. And sometimes I always talk about that, like in terms of, for example, Christianity. There are people that search for meaning in religion as a quick fix or a quick solution, and I don't actually think that there is a way of finding meaning in anything metaphysical, for example, right? But just because that's not exactly the solution to jump into something metaphysical, I also don't think necessarily that jumping to indifference is any better. And there is like a tug of war inside, I think, all of us, between letting things just be and will. And I think it's interesting because as I lay dying, I don't want to spoil for those who haven't participated on the last book club, but I think one of the big things that we took from the conversation was the idea of will, of like inserting your own will into life and making decisions. And if anything, this book proposes almost the opposite.
Well, I wanted to push something there. And again, like, if anyone has anything to say and they want to join in, by all means, you come on the stage if you want. Pause. There is the idea that Camus' philosophy only really works in opposition to other people. Camus' philosophy only works as someone who rejects and almost drops out of society. Because he seems to be neglecting the fact that human beings are somewhat communal in nature. And if we look at his philosophy, what is he ultimately doing? He's allowing everyone else to express themselves, anticipating that there will be some reciprocation with the way that they live their life also. But whatever they do, he essentially has no interest in. It's a very oppositional thing. But there is an angst to it. There's a borderline hatred of it. There's a borderline hatred of people. Put it this way, he is ultimately trying to press his philosophy on other people at the same time.
You mean more so in the
more so. But I mean, it's clear, like, it's Camus' philosophy also.
Yeah.
Like, the idea that Mosso becomes filled with such vitriol at the chaplain towards the end, that he's I mean, That's I don't even mean like in the adjective antagonistic. I mean, in terms of a narrative, it's antagonistic behavior in the sense that this is the kind of thing you would imagine an antagonist to do, of screaming your beliefs down on someone that doesn't think the same as you do. And yet it's like what Jay said, like it's almost as though it's like he's charging a battery.
Yeah,
Tartov,
you can bring them up.
can I bring you in? I'm going to just try and bring Karel
I think
in.
you can say invite to speak. No, go.
Hold on,
Go here on the person here.
I'm going to bring you onto the stage. 1 second.
No.
Yes. We are just clicking buttons at the minute. 1 second.
There is something to invite to speak. Yeah, there you go. Opening mod. Sorry, guys, I'll figure it out. You can continue to speak while I find the.
Yes, but as
invite to speak's right here.
Okay. Go on. You're gonna come in now, so feel free to speak.
You want to finish your point?
Before? No, go on.
Hey, can you hear me? So, like,
yes.
if I look at this entire narrative, like, the person himself is actually quite honest. He doesn't judge. He's just living his life. And actually, what the entire story reveals is like a hypocrisy of a system. Because, like, as soon as like the crime is committed, the first thing is, yeah, just repent to the cross. You will get 1 year. But because he refuses this and simply says, yeah, I don't believe this, and he just keeps being honest, and things get worse and worse and worse, and like the entire fraudulity of the system is like revealed because everybody's like, as you mentioned before, like the decorum, that they're like, yeah, this is how we deal with stuff, and actually he's like simply living his life. But if you look at the historical context, like Camus, he knew very well what was like the situation of like living in Algeria. He knew like all the insanity that happened during the war. Like in a way, it's like a lot of people were judged for what they did. And Camus is more like making a point like, people, do you realize what simply happened to people? And we are all trying, like the society is trying to be judgmental and like really self-validating their honor and saying, you are the bad guy, we are the good guys. By judging him, by this, it actually reveals the entire hypocrisy. If you look at the other works of Camus, this is also like an element he often brings up, like where you have like the system, like people justify themselves, but if you look really deeply at it, you see that it's not consistent with how system they proclaim and how it actually works. It's so contradictory. Also, like if you knew like the independence movement going on at that time and like the entire to say it. Do you catch my drift?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I think what's interesting is, especially towards the end when he's speaking out, I mean, he literally uses the description of the system. It's quite funny actually because he talks about the 1789 revolution and that he's trying to draw parallels to that also. And he's kind of disappointed at the fact that that there's no steps to the guillotine. It's the final part of the second part does also feel, not the final chapter, which is him primarily espousing his philosophy, but it does also feel as though it becomes a more political novel as well. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, there is an element of, I mean, Camus himself, he was a political person. He wrote for an anti-colonial newspaper. This book was published during the Nazi occupation of France as well. You have to remember that. So there is an element of like what is happening in the world around him while he published this book. It does create a layer of politics, but I still think that in the crux of like the book is still the idea of even like something like bringing back to Kierkegaard, like is it the tension between the indifference of the world, the absurdity of existence, and what can we do to actually create meaning in our lives. What do you guys think about that? If anyone wants to say anything. Anyway, I don't know, like I'm thinking about what you said. In a way, if we are to extrapolate, as I said before, right in the beginning of the conversation, the contrast between the systems around us, and what can we actually do and choose for our life is actually something quite important. Because even a character that, almost as Jay mentioned earlier, flows and in the first part of the book allows himself to just do things for the sake of doing things, even he at some point has to face the system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think also it's quite interesting, the historical context of the novel. I think it brings another light onto it then, because I feel as though, you know, um, it, Jay mentioned earlier the idea of this being something like, oh, I did live my life like this. And I'm sure all of us, especially when we were younger, you go through that natural like teenage nihilism and whatnot, and some people don't grow out of it. Some people do continue to see the world as a hopeless place and there's nothing applicable. But then a lot of purpose of philosophy, I mean, one of my personal hang-ups with a lot of philosophy is the idea that it isn't applicable to one's life because it's not based in any kind of materialism. This is kind of the antidote to one of the antidotes to existentialism, in the sense that, okay, no, we can just accept and whatnot and roll with the punches and be passive. But then you also think about the context of it, of applying a philosophy like this during the time in which the Nazi occupation of France is ongoing. You would anticipate that the more righteous thing to do, regardless of context, but especially with the context, the more righteous, heroic, honorable, future-oriented thing to do would be to craft some kind of philosophy that's about speaking out against opposition. Because it doesn't necessarily suggest that he suggests that there are flaws within the system, but he doesn't suggest that Meursault doesn't have any agency to be able to do anything. They give him the opportunity to speak out in court, which may, reduce his sentence. His lawyer is kind of optimistic that he believes, we're going to get a good, what's the term? We're going to get a good reaction from the jury, probably because, they're if you take agency and responsibility for the things that do go on, then people within society will look at you favorably and fairly. But Meursault isn't particularly concerned about that, because there are things in place, and just the same way that he is able to go around his life and just let things be, the system, it's almost as though the system itself is a person, and the way that is just the way that is, and he doesn't want anyone intruding on him, and therefore he will not intrude on anything else. Even if a system is unjust, in a way he still treats it as it exists and so it shall be, and if it ends, it ends, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. And if it continues to be an unjust system, why not? Because all that matters is what's now. And it's funny because he then reflects on the yesterday and tomorrow, because he doesn't. This is something that I thought about, actually, because his philosophy and his outlook is so present orientated. The sensorial act of living is everything to Meursault, to the point that the sun itself is the be all and end all experience for him. And there's the point where he says, if he were to give the reason as to why he killed him, the sun made him do it. And it's just, it speaks a lot to the character of, I mean, that is the point where, if you were to bring it into if you were to psychoanalyze the character, you could say, okay, this is a sociopathic character, because his only driving force is immediate sensorial experience. There's no empathy, there's no thought, and yet at the same time, he has a nostalgia for what he no longer has. But I don't know if that's just because the nostalgia is something that a sensorial experience that he is missing out on. I don't want to keep yapping a lot, so
Yeah, I'll bring Diorama in and we can talk a bit more.
yeah, I'll bring Diorama to the stage.
Hello.
Hello. So what you just said, Lewis, is kind of something that I had noticed when I was reading. And I'm like most people, I read this a long time ago in high school in my French class. And I, just to frame my adult perspective on it, I'm a behavioral
Mhm.
health professional, and it's really hard for me not to pathologize fictional characters when I come across them.
Yeah.
But something I noticed is while he obviously doesn't have a lot of feeling for people or for situations that happen to him, the way he speaks about nature is full of feeling and beauty. The words he uses are gorgeous.
Mm.
He seems to face nature, the beach, with like reverence that he doesn't have. It's just such a stark difference to me in the words that are used when he's describing like a person as opposed to describing something in the natural world. And we're talking a lot about how he's often characterized as a sociopath, which is not a current term in terms of like behavioral health. Um, you might say he's got some features of like antisocial personality disorder or an attachment disorder when it comes to his mother. I actually was curious, and I found an article. I forgot the author's name, and I can put that in the chat. Um, but he talked a little bit about how Merceau might actually be diagnosed with in what 2018 was called Asperger's disorder, but now we call it autism spectrum disorder. And it's not that it's just that he doesn't understand the feelings of others. He doesn't understand what's happening to him in court. He doesn't have the frame of reference for why other people feel things. And it's interesting because the title is stranger or outsider, but there are a lot of people like him. I don't know, I feel like the lady in my HR might be like Marcel. I remember like thinking like, is she Marcel? And I know people in life that seem to come off like him, but I think a lot of people with autism spectrum disorder, and that's not my area of specialty, so I could be completely wrong, but you see that they have trouble interfacing with other people or feeling their feelings in a way that might be more common. But they do have these passions, like, so for Meursault, his meaning it's not that life is meaningless. He found meaning in life. He found so much joy in just going to the beach. Those, like Lewis, you said, those, like, sensorial parts of life, and that's valid, right? So, people with autism often, they have these passions that, they do find a lot of joy and a lot of meaning in, even if the way that they interface with people is atypical. So, in defense of Meursault, I think he's not without feeling. I think it's just there's a part of him that's obviously missing, and I would never deny that. But there's still meaning in his life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that's the thing. Like when he's on the stand, that there's a part of me that I 100% identify and feel
Same,
and
same,
share
same.
with Meursault. And I mean, it's funny because like I've mentioned this on the podcast a lot as well on Acid. This idea of I cannot function when people aren't just 100% themselves, when there isn't that performative aspect. And saying that to most people, I understand that people are like, yeah, but I'm not gonna like open myself up and just live my absolute truth in the face of everyone all the time. And I'm like, yeah, but why? Although my rational side says, okay, I understand why, because
Privacy, I think.
well, even more so, like we're trying to communicate to one another, and we also try and communicate in an amicable way, so that people don't become so completely put off by the things that we actually feel without broader context. Where, as the reader, we have context to Meursault because we've been in his internal world, and so we see, I somewhat empathize and I somewhat understand why you don't feel anything, because you are just a person that doesn't. I mean, he feels things. He does feel things, but his expressions of them, they aren't as intense as say some other people's are, whether he's rationalized the decision or whether he just accepts and is content with the decision. But with that, I understand what you're saying, and I do agree with him. I think that as you said, we all Diorama's probably the person that's best equipped to be able to actually psychoanalyze someone. But the thing is, we're all going to do it, even though none of us are qualified to do it, because it's just the natural way that we look at character, and we all assume that we all assume that we're right, that we can read people well. And the thing is, like a character like him, I mean, if you were to go into just brutally diagnose him immediately, if you read the way that he conducts actions, you would say, oh, this is an autistic person.
Yeah, and I would say something as well. Like, I think that I really, really connect with the character, but there is a level of apathy that I think I agree with. Like, there's the presence of nature and the feelings towards nature, which is interesting because we see many times, we always talk about that as people that are neurodivergent. We also talk about how we have a great connection to nature as well. And it's something that is quite common, right? But I feel like there is a level of apathy that I think Paul said it really well, and I want to read his little comment. He said, I think Camus is criticizing passivity through this book. It's one thing to recognize the absurdity of life and society, but it's everyone's duty to rebel against it. Otherwise, you just end up like Morceau, someone who is always right but always loses. And I really, really like ultimately, yeah, we can empathize with the character. We can recognize the character in ourselves and the aspects of antisocial or neurodivergency that he has. But ultimately, apathy is no way to live still.
Yeah.
Apathy is no way to live. You know what I mean? Like, there's a level of that I still think there's something about the indifference of Morceau that still gets me, like, in a deeper way.
I think that this is just a personal thing. My biggest I don't know what you would call it, hurdle or anything like that. I think my relation with Morceau is that I identify so much of myself within him and I can recognize it. And if I could put it this way, if I were in my completely neutral reptilian brain mode, I would probably be a person like Morceau.
Yeah,
I wouldn't feel much about things because I would accept and be content, and then I would look at everyone else as though they were performing, as though they should be adoptive of my philosophy of the way I live my life, which is I am just this and do not compromise it for anyone. However, the reason that I'm not like that is because there's some, I would have described it as rationality, but you might be correct in describing it as empathy or anti-apathy perhaps, which is I don't do that because, again, whether Camus is criticizing it or not, I'm not sure if he is, but if he is, then yes, then you do end up like a Morceau, which may be the worst kind of person to have had around at the time during the Nazi occupation of France, which is someone that says, what will be, will be. At the end of the day, it is what it is. I mean, put it this way, Morceau is the kind of person that quotes, whose wisdom are those packaged idioms that are the worst types of philosophy in the world. Oh, it is what it is. At the end of the day, que sera, sera. It's just, it offers nothing, but it's the veneer of deep intellect.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I don't think Camus himself is that at all. I think Camus is a very interesting person. Stefan said something which made me giggle internally, that most great characters in fictions have a level of neurodivergency. Oh, yeah. I think it's also because as soon as we start dissecting someone's mind or speaking through someone's mind, either through a point of view on a story, then we start thinking of the quirks of our own brain.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and it's very, very easy to consider that very quickly.
Well, it's also it's also because our entire worldview is, quote, restricted to a point by our own worldview. We can only view the entirety of the human condition in history through our own brain right now, all the way we see it. And so we assume that this is the default position that every other human being undergoes. I would assume that everyone thinks and feels the exact same as I do, and you would with you. And then what happens is when you actually get the deep internal truth of a person, you're like, oh, this is this normal, or is this person neurodivergent, or am I the one that's different?
Or is everyone a bit neurodivergent? Ultimately, Paul mentioned that as well. Like, there's always that part of me that thinks, you know what? Everyone's a bit weird. Everyone's perception is weird. I want to change the subject for 5 seconds because I thought it was interesting. But one of my biggest things with the book and the ending, now looking back again, and I think Tyler, which is my fellow Christian in the chat, might recognize a bit of that as well. Because I think one of the biggest fundamental shifts in the book is Morceau's acceptance of his beheading, his acceptance of his death towards the end, and the conversation that he has with the religious figure. It was very important to me again in the story. It is almost full circle because as a Catholic, memento mori, it's something that is always in my head. This acceptance that we are gonna die from ashes to ashes, like this is gonna happen. You know, that there is a level of the irrationality of our existence. Then even if we want to explain or understand it, we're all gonna die. It's just a fact, right? And in a way, Camus ends up accidentally Christian in that aspect, because in the end, Morceau's almost redemption is also in the acceptance of his memento mori, his acceptance of his own death. And I thought it was funny. I noted that down because I thought, interesting, because there's no way we can escape the same. I mean, we might have completely different answers for the same questions, but the same questions are always going to be in. And even if we have, as you said, like, I have a perception of the world, you have a perception of the world, everyone here has a different perception, we can never escape those pillars of life that will always connect us. Everyone has a mother. Everyone's gonna die, whether you know it or when, you know what I mean? There's always that in which connects our existence. And in the end of the story, like, he lived his life almost in a flow state, like going from things to things. And as I said, the system taught him there's always a way in which you're going to have to conform, you know? Do you understand what I mean?
No, I understand. I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting because even if he's trying to escape this idea of like something greater, and even if he's saying that maybe the answer is to be indifferent, I do think that us Christians, in a way, even though we ascribe a lot of meaning to life, there is a level of the indifference of death that I, for example, had to come to terms with. Like, I know I'm going to die, but it's not something that I'm scared of, you know? So in a way, even if I achieve from a completely different angle, I'm going to read Paula's question in a minute. Even if I achieve the same answer for a completely different angle, I still achieve the same answer. The memento mori, we are going to die. Like, it doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, however, I still think that, like, you also need to understand that Merceau, he only comes to that conclusion through a complete rejection of God.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's a mirror of each other. Like, he achieves that from the rejection. I achieve that through the acceptance. It's almost the opposite.
Yeah.
And I think Tyler brought it up do you want to read it? Because, yeah, from an epistemological perspective, how can we actually know that life has no meaning? We can. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Objective meaning. Yeah.
Jay then said, Camus never said that life had no meaning. The fact of the matter is that, well, actually, I would like to pose this question to people. In regards of the novel, in regards of the philosophy that Camus puts forth in this, would you say that if you were to lean towards one side or the other, would you call it a beneficial philosophy? Do you think that it's something that can be applied to a person's life? Do you think that a person's life will be enriched through this philosophy? I'd just like to put that forward to people.
Can I just quickly interject with this thing that the funny thing that he never claimed he had a philosophy, and a bunch of people started saying there is a philosophy and stuff like this.
Yeah, go
I think
on.
it's the funniest thing about Camus and his philosophy, because he never had a philosophy. And I mean, he claimed to in journals and other stuff, it's like they should not have a philosophy. You should not go into abstractions. It's all stupid and meaningless, and it's really bad. You actually just have to live life and just do concrete actions, talk about concrete people, and do concrete things. But actually, later in life, he was fighting abstractions, like he was fighting communism and other stuff, just getting too much into abstractions. So it's kind of also a bit two-sided, that he was claiming one thing but doing the other thing. That I kind of lost respect for Camus recently, reading more, But on the other hand, he had these hints, and he was searching for this idea of like, fuck the abstractions, fuck the philosophy, just embrace fucking sun and live in the life, and that's it. And I think that people afterwards and people reading the public things and his relationship with Sartre and his relationship with other people afterwards and critics, because it's easy to compartmentalize people and commute with others, and you just say, oh, he's one of the existentialists, he's one of those who says life has no meaning, so let's treat him this way. And I think it's a bit unfair to commute to talk about this, or like to say that it was a philosophy and life has no meaning and stuff like this. But I don't want to derail it, and you can still discuss this topic, but I just think it's just outside of Camus, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I read it, and there's no point that I think that Camus comes forward and says life has no meaning.
Yeah.
It's like right from the beginning. It's why I think it's a rather optimistic novel more than anything. It just so happens that most of the things that we're also speaking of, I mean, put it this way, we've spoken primarily of like transcendental art and whatnot, of this idea of trying to reach something beyond. And I think it's very refreshing having someone to say, 1 second, we're all talking shit a little bit. What matters is what is going on right here, right now, because it's the only thing that, even if that does exist, even if there is transcendence out there, we will never know until we die anyway. So we may as well just focus on what we have here now and be happy that we're even here now.
I mean, you might not know, you might die, and then it's, again, you just get reversed into the same thing, and you'll never know.
Yeah. I'm just looking at Diorama said, it's interesting. I worked for a suicide hotline for a long time as a counselor and in quality assurance, so I've held or listened to hundreds and hundreds of suicidal individuals. Some people are suicidal because of the pressure of making life meaningful. Some people find relief from the idea that there is no meaning.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? Like, I don't know, because I understand why a relief though, because then the weight is lifted from you. The weight is lifted from having to find meaning, because if there's no meaning, then there's no necessity to find it. But I also don't think that Camus is saying that there's no meaning in life. I just think that he's, in a way, proposing that it's too absurd for us to grasp it.
Yeah. Trevor, you're in, by the way. Also, Jay, I think you're either driving down the road or something.
Oh, sorry, I'm just on the parking lot. It's just city noise.
Hi, Trevor.
Hi. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I find it interesting. For me, like deciding whether this philosophy is useful, especially when it comes to the idea that I think we all deal with, which is death anxiety, and how, thinking about life's meaning through religion or thinking about the indifference and embracing of nothingness. I really think for me, it just sort of densifies the contemplation that I deal with when thinking about my own death anxiety. I end without answers. It doesn't necessarily help, or it's not like therapeutic in any way, but I do think for me, reading this book, embracing the idea of the indifference, it just densified my contemplation. I'm not sure if anyone else feels that way, or if anybody feels any sense of finality in their thought of, do I agree with one thing and live my life with that idea of embracing the indifference, or do I live my life thinking that there will be heaven or something after? So I sort of am in between all the time, contemplating both. But the contemplation has been deepened by my experience with this book. So
I don't really have like any fear of death per se, if there's an afterlife, like you go to heaven, go to hell, or you're reborn or whatever. My only real anxiety I have is about meaning. It's about meaning, because especially recently with, again, stuff I'm not gonna go into detail, but of thinking, am I doing the right thing with my life? And I kind of feel like there's one side of me that wants to embrace a darker aspect of Monsieur's soul and just not care about anything. But no, I'm trying to best to embrace some good aspects. Like, what if there is no official meaning written as a law or anything? Just fucking make up your own, man.
I'm thinking about this idea of indifference in which we were talking about earlier, and even what George just said. I think there's a reason also that Camus uses the word gentle indifference and not just indifference, like because there is like I don't know if I ever felt death anxiety. Did you ever feel death anxiety?
I haven't, no.
No, I don't think I ever felt it, but I thought it was interesting what you just said, Trevor, as well.
Well, I think in relation to
I'm
what
thinking.
what George is saying is this idea that, you know, ultimately George is also saying like not feeling it,
Yeah.
but at the same time feeling anxiety for, am I doing the right thing in life?
Yeah.
I think part of that anxiety also only exists because of the timeline that we have. We all know that death is approaching, and so because of that, I think the only reason that you would question, am I doing the right thing in life, is because
Or the finality of
I
it.
have a finite time to get it all right.
So in a way, even if we don't diagnose it as a death anxiety, if we are worried about what we're doing now, there's a level of death anxiety to it.
Yeah, because
isn't it?
because
Yeah, it's memento mori.
Yeah. It's a memento
I
mori.
have to get it all right before it's too late. But again, I do find that this, like, we'll use the term philosophy, even though like Jay's correct to saying it's not officially a philosophy, but it's easier to say than his mode of thinking. Like Camus' philosophy in Stranger, I do find rather applicable. Of there does come a point I've really distanced myself. Like relatively recently, I was reading Nietzsche again, and I think Nietzsche's a great thinker, and I love his ideas. However, every time I read it, I just think, God, only someone as intelligent as that, with the time to think, could come up with something that could be so antithetical to the act of living life. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course I know what you mean. And we've been discussing this a lot recently on the podcast as well. This overthinking of life. And in a way, there is a solace to that. Like, you know, the gentle indifference is even what Dharma said earlier. Like, not that I particularly perceive that life has no meaning, but at the same time, I do think that I have thought too much about that to the point of exhaustion and stress. You know,
it's unnecessary neuroses, isn't it? And it's like George just put,
yeah, exactly.
Like Jung was diagnosed Nietzsche as neurotic. Of course it is, because
of course it did.
What's the point in living the one life that you have in a level where thinking about your death causes you a level of stress to the point that, well, that's a very interesting way of putting it, Jay. Does death think about you? That's actually both comedic and poetic. I'm going to steal that. There is this idea of, in the one life that you have, it's a very broad thing to say, and I'm being kind of hyperbolic with it, but has Nietzsche offered anything beneficial to humanity in his thought process?
He's right. He's right. I mean, I know what you mean in the sense of like because you think of the practicality of
like when you're thinking of your family, and you're thinking of your children, and you're thinking of all the abundance that life has to offer. Even because think about that, even in Camus, even in The Stranger, ultimately, what does he still have? He still has the sun shining down on his face, and that's something that we can all resonate with, and that's a kind of quote material immaterial thing that exists, that offers, that's a greater descriptor of life and the act of living, the most theoretical than practically any theoretical thing is.
Yeah, but it's what I said earlier. It's like there ultimately, if we achieve from this angle or that angle, we're all gonna find this commonality of the act of living, which is, I mean, if we call it a system, if we try to make sense of it through philosophy, through religion, through going with the flow of, I mean, whatever we choose is still the same, right? There's still a commonality with that. There's still the sun shining in our bodies.
It's like the one definition that we could confidently say, the one definition of life is that we are not dead. And so in that brief period that we are not dead and we do not exist, what would be the benefit of constantly neurotically hypothesizing about what we are going to be spending 99.999% of our time as.
So we can all go up and turn off this call and go because the book club is over because there's no point in conversation about philosophy. Listen, I know exactly what you mean because I struggle with that within myself so often. This thinking of thinking and then the meaning of thinking, and it's a lot, you know. And I get it. Like, there's many times that I wish I could just like, oh, do you know what? The gentle indifference, let me just accept it and just live, right? But at least I can't, you know? Stuff like that escalated quickly. But yeah, I still find joy in philosophical questioning, you know? I don't think I could ever be indifferent to meaning. Like, there's still joy in the questioning itself.
But exactly, like, you don't have to say that there is no meaning. Like, there's truth beyond that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I need to use Nietzsche emoji on the Chris comment. You are not a true philosopher until you say fuck off philosophy. Yeah. But can we ever be truly neutral to the act of living? That's what I'm proposing back, you know?
In what way?
Can we ever be truly neutral to the act of living? Like,
But what would neutrality mean?
exactly, there's no way that we can ever even be neutral to the act of meaning, because as soon as we try, it makes no sense.
Why?
Because we're always going to find the commonality within each other, which creates meaning in itself, even if it's like absurd, as Camus would propose. The commonality between the experiences, the fact that he's posing that Morceau is a character that is so alienated, it's so outsider, but here we are. I was gonna count how many of us. Loads of us that find a commonality within the character. It just poses already the question back that there's no neutrality. You know what I mean? There is no way that we can be neutral to life, because even if we think that we are ourselves outsider, that we are ourselves alienated from the world, we all, in a way, think the same. We all feel those things. So it's, I don't know. I would like to believe that there is. I'm trying to, like, because I feel this quite deeply, actually, because one of the reasons that I don't know if you remember, like, the beginning of this week, I said sometime when I started reading the book again, and then I said, don't know, sometimes I don't have time for this. Do you remember me saying that?
Yeah.
And the reason is because it's also that, like, I love this book. It's a great book, but oftentimes you can caught yourself in a loop of thought that really does create the outsider. You create your own outsider. You alienate yourself by thinking that you're thinking so different than other people, by separating your own thought, even like recognizing the thought of someone else, you know?
Well, I think this was my one not discrepancy, but reaction I had to the very slight degree of immaturity in the novel, because we understand Meursault because we are following his internal world. We directly get to read it. But the thing is, imagine how alien he would seem. Imagine how, what's the term? Imagine how full of himself he would seem going through this if we were simply offered the perspective of another person. His mode of being would come across as rather pretentious. A truth to it, but pretentious in a way, because he is still, it's not complete passivity. He is still imposing his philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. Because ultimately, is that like we create our own outsider mode of. I'm gonna bring Brian in a second. Let me just finish this point. We do create our own, from our perspective of, like, we alienate ourselves. We really do.
Brian's coming in. Karel, Tartuffe, if you have to go, it's good you being
Hello. Am I
here. Hi,
in?
Brian.
Hello. I just want to chime in real quick. I don't know if this was already stated, but I do see a lot of commonality with this book with, like, the Underground Man that we read the first book club. Maybe like the opposite, like Underground Man is actively saying, like, I'm think so different from everyone. Was that mentioned? Okay,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. No, go for
Sorry.
it. Go for
Go
it.
for it.
Yeah, I just chimed in. Yeah, I was just it's like kind of the opposite, the yin and yang, I guess, of being of an outsider. You know what I mean? Where yeah, I do find a lot of similar ways of thinking. What's the character's name? I forget the character's name in The
No,
Stranger. Yeah, I find a lot of similarities with my way of thinking, where you're just like okay, that happened. Let's just move on. Like overthinking, and then when I like, it's funny in the beginning. First off, I think this is one of the best first chapters in any book I've ever read. I love the first chapter to this book. And like how like he's just like focusing on all these minute details, and like the passing of his mother is like almost an afterthought in like the first chapter of the book, and he's so worried about like what everyone thinks about him, and like oh like, and then he's like, oh, my mother died, oh, that wasn't my fault though. He's like, why did I say that? I don't know. I don't know. I'm kind of like rambling here, but
Oh,
I don't know what the fuck to say. But what was it
go
called?
for
Yeah.
it.
What was that?
Yeah, no, keep going. It's fine, honestly.
Okay, yeah, and then like how he gets involved with like was it Raymond is the neighbor? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Yeah, and how he gets involved with him, but he thinks he's like not doing anything bad. We're objectively like he knows he's like a piece of shit like character. You know what I mean? It's just like there's no like way around it. Like he's a womanizer, and I thought it was like funny this time when I noticed when he's trying to like act tough in front of the cop, and the cop slaps the cigarette out of his mouth, and then like he gives a quick look to like the main character, and he, like a look of like, oh fuck, I'm looking like a bitch for the lack of a better
Yeah.
word. Like he's looking weak and stuff. And then after he talks to the cop, he's like, "Oh, I had that under control. I know how to deal with cops and stuff." It's like, well, it doesn't look like it. You know what I mean? And like I got that. Like I remember the first time I read that, probably I didn't register that, but now reading it again, I'm like, oh yeah, like no one has anything under control. Yeah, because this is considered absurdist book and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And to my knowledge, absurdism absurdism is very close to nihilism, but what's it called? There's like, but with absurdism, if I'm correct, it's like opposed to nihilism where everything's like dour. Absurdism, you embrace the absurdity of life and find the happiness within it, or like the joy of it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So it's like the man with the dog always resonated with me from the beginning. How he would like the man will kick the dog for not moving too fast, for but the dog just wants to pee, and he like yelling at him, and it's just like I don't know, if you just stop and fucking access what's the word, like be more in tune with the world around you, you wouldn't be so frustrated almost, like because the
Mm.
man and the dog can't like communicate, right? And it's like the dog just wants to pee, he gets mad for him like pulling him, and I believe the dog like defecates in the house or something. I believe, I forget, but like
Yeah.
it's along that point, and then the dog leaves, and then he's like feels all this sadness. You know what I mean? The dog's gone, and then they're like, "Do you want like?" Maybe you should go get him, or you know, they might kill him or whatever. He's like, I don't know, whatever, fuck that dog or whatever. But you hear him crying in his room alone. I don't know what the fuck. I'm not sure what that's trying to say and stuff, but it's just like I guess it just goes back to like these people are like rejecting their emotions and what they truly want and stuff like that. But maybe I don't know. But that's really all I have to say right now. It was a little bit of a ramble, but
No, it's not. It's not. I like hearing people's perspective. And the thing is, it's like we're all gonna end up rambling here anyway because I think that this book is I think if it can be applied for anything, I think it's kind of an antidote to neuroses, to a
uh-huh.
neurotic style of thinking. I
So would
mean,
you guys imagine like Woody Allen as a character or what?
what Merceau?
Yeah. He's a
That's an interesting one.
No, do you know, I actually imagine him more of like a Jacques Tati character. I imagine like the
Okay.
world is falling around him, and he's just happy to go along with it in many ways, like kind of blissfully ignorant of the deep intrusive thoughts that plague most other people. I think he's just happy with it. Exactly. Playtime Stranger by Nuka's
Yeah.
Horizon. I think that
I sometimes read it as like, I mean, the last time I read it, I was just like, is this guy like autistic or something? Where he's just like in
we
denial.
literally mentioned that earlier.
Yeah,
We had a full
right.
conversation about this.
He comes off as very autistic to me, but I don't know. I was like, I don't know if was autism a thing diagnosed in the when this book came out. I don't think so, but
I'm sure Diorama probably knows.
oh, okay. What did it
I
think?
would say, I actually don't know when autism was first identified. Autism actually started out referring to more, I think maybe you might have seen the movie Rain Man. That's kind of how autism was first categorized. It's now expanded quite a lot in its meaning, and you might hear it referred to as something like autism spectrum disorder. The more high functioning portion of that spectrum, you may have also heard referred to as Asperger's disorder, which has kind of been moved into the autism spectrum.
Yeah.
Because, like Marceau goes to his job every day. He has relationships with other people. So he is what we might now
Functioning.
call high functioning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to diagnose him either, because we might not have enough information to do that. But yeah, we did talk about it earlier, and I had the same feeling where I'm like, I wonder if maybe the way he sees the world is fundamentally different from most people, but not necessarily. I think a lot of people look at the book and they're like, what's wrong with this guy? I don't know if it's necessarily wrong. I try to kind of look at that from a really neutral perspective.
Uh-huh.
I think we've all inadvertently diagnosed him anyway, whether we wanted to or not. We've all seemed to come to a similar conclusion. I think
Yeah,
that I think that also, like, one of the things that we didn't mention as much was this idea that in the second part of the novel, what I find interesting is this idea that the actions of part one they all become recontextualized by Merceau committing the murder of the Arab. But then what ends up happening is that they all try to become explained and contextualized in a way that they all make sense, as though that there's some narrative that actually occurs. And if I'm going to use like something anecdotal here of something recently, which I actually didn't get a chance to mention, which I was going to mention on the podcast, but I'll mention it now and it kind of relates. So I mentioned that last week there was a very big issue, if you want to call it that, with our building and I'll use the correct term, a crackhead that was in the building. And
Scientific term.
And what ended up happening was that she was around. I won't give the exact details, but a man in our building who just moved in brought her in, and she was living with him, and she was keeping us up all night, every night. So what ends up happening is I see her over the course of like 4 days or something. And she's like at fucking midnight. She's walking around with just a shirt on and no pants on up and down the street, like on the phone, talking dead loud. Another day, she brings her son to us, and then her son and her are fighting in the corridor, and he's screaming his head off and everything. Then there's other times where she's just like going up to people in like the building and saying, "Oh yeah, I've had problems and everything like that." And if you take all of these individual things, it's like they're all just individual what would you call them, events that occur that like just happen. They're like interactions that you have with a person. But then on the last day I had to call the police on her because I heard her on the phone to someone at like 1 a.m. from downstairs, and then she's screaming and she's fucking smashing shit, and then she ends up getting arrested because she starts assaulting the police officers that arrive for a wellness check. And then what ends up happening is like the police are coming to you and they're asking, okay, so has anything else happened? And then all of a sudden, all of these events which are so inconsequential in and of themselves, now that something, quote, important has happened, now that she's been arrested, now that she's gone too far against the social status of the way that we're supposed to perform with one another, now all of those things in my head, this means this and this means that, and now I'm able to contextualize why she was on the phone to someone talking about her children, why she was going up and down. And this is something, I'm bringing it all around. This is something similar that happens in The Stranger, in the sense that Merceau, with the guy with the dog, Merceau and Marie and the relationship that he has with her, Merceau and his reaction at his mother's funeral, now they all have to become part of this grand narrative because he's killed someone. And so we want to understand him. And so everything that ultimately actually doesn't mean anything, now for everyone else in society to explain who and what this person is and exactly why they're an outcast, why they don't fit into society, now that all has to mean something. Now we have to create the narrative which explains who this person is and why they got there. I don't know if anyone else felt anything similar to that, or if anyone thought
I feel like
was
that's just how people are in real life. You know what I mean? Like, oh, that guy was so nice, and then you start like nitpicking like little things. Well, that could mean this and that could mean that. You know what I mean? You try to like fill in the blanks and be like, oh, this is why a person did X, Y, and Z. You know what I mean? I feel like people just, that's very true to life, how people like when someone does something horrible, or be like, I don't know, someone, maybe a couple gets a divorce or something, you'd be like, oh, well, he always used to do that, or you know, maybe she didn't like that and stuff like that. I don't know. I feel like I said, it's very true to life how people react to situations.
Well, I'm wondering, does anyone else have anything interesting about the novel that they want to talk about? If anyone wants to either jump in, chime in, anything else, by all means. I'm just seeing that Mo is typing. We haven't just gone silent for no reason. Fair enough. So, on Mo's advice, we can say that we got everything. I think that's it then. I think we can call it there. Thanks everyone for coming. Oh, Tyler, well, we're still here.
Gordon as well.
Oh, Tyler, we'll wait for you. In suspense.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about the characters? We mentioned it somewhere in the beginning, but the appeal of the character, and just characters like this in life, doesn't matter the label, that not conforming to social norms. And Dharma mentioned that other people liked it, that some people were not bothered about the death and other stuff, because those characters are appealing, right? Like maybe to not everybody, maybe not to the court, not to the justice, not maybe to the system itself, but to there are people who are quite appealing. And I had people like this in life at work and stuff that are a bit different from normal, and sometimes they do bad things, quote unquote, but sometimes you're like, oh, at least it's interesting, right? Like you have something that not other people do, and you're like, oh yeah, cool, you didn't react to your mother, that's interesting. It's maybe bothers me a bit, but at least you're not like a normie that just does what everybody else does.
Yeah. I think we had like this conversation recently. I can't remember when it was, but it was also, I think it might have actually been you, Jay, that was saying a hot take. I think most of the interesting characters in fiction are actually autistic, or something like most of the people that create something are autistic. Yeah.
Or just a bit of also sociopath, psychopath, whatever disorder, like, right? Like it's not normie, right? It's either you have a disorder or you have just different brain, and it doesn't. And it's sometimes the line is blurry, right? Like we already had the discussion that I kind of don't agree with the asparagus syndrome, because I don't think there's other things that are gonna point the direction. But it doesn't really matter, right? The label doesn't matter. We like to put labels on stuff, so it's easier to put somebody in this corner or that corner, so you understand and you have an explanation for things, which is the whole interest. On the other, always absurdism that kind of tells you like, oh no, don't put you into labels, because labels not going to work at the end of the day, and it's better to embrace not having fucking labels at all than putting wrong labels and then getting disappointed by labels. But it's really interesting that these sort of people with blurry line in between this, like, oh, they are interesting people. Yeah. And sometimes you lean towards them and you think, okay, maybe that person just has a different brain and they're a nice person. And then you get closer and then you realize that maybe not. And they're just going to kill somebody. And then you have to distance yourself from them at some point.
Tyler, it's all yours.
Yes, I'm here. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. I was just gonna say, I read The Stranger about 5 years ago, and it was during a point in my life that I was going through my probably my most major bout with. At that point, I was diagnosed with clinical depression, but
Mhm.
before that, a couple of years before that, I had read Ecclesiastes, gone through an entire study of Ecclesiastes, which was what I referenced in the chat earlier, talking about this. Um, but it was actually weird because I read Ecclesiastes first, and then the thoughts of like, oh man, yeah, you're right. Like everything is so like just mundane, and everything's just like feels so pointless at points in life and whatnot. I'm just like, man, maybe there is a point. Maybe life isn't so much as special or as all it's cracked up to be. And then later on, just kind of like um so much stuff happened during the subsequent years that really affected me personally. And then I read Camus at like the lowest point of my life as far as like dealing with depression, and like Camus was very kind of comforting to me in a way, because like I didn't I wasn't at a point where I completely denied like the biblical answer to the problem of like life and meaning and whatnot. But Camus was very comforting in the fact that it was like very much like, yeah, you can determine things for yourself. You can see the good in things outside of like whatever you're experiencing. And um it's ultimately, it gives you that autonomy to basically figure out like meaning for yourself, and like find things that you enjoy and that you can find greater happiness in. But having said that, getting so much more like less depressed, and just having a generally more positive outlook and a more closer um spiritual relationship with God, and evolving in that way over the past 5 years, I've really come to a point where I'm just like thinking to myself, both in terms of like how I view Sartre and Camus. I'm just like, yeah, you were kind of useful for a time, but like the philosophical problems that I now have, I'm just like, like I value what is being said here, and that perspective is valued, but at the same time, I just kind of view it now as just like, yeah, this is kind of silly to me now, having like gone through that and kind of evolved past it. Not to discredit anything that has been written from them or anything like that, but to me personally, it's just it was a temporary solution that I now see as like very much lacking, in my opinion. But it was just kind of weird how I kind of experienced that kind of backwards, where it was like the Bible kind of threw me into kind of going in that direction of like questioning like how special life is, and um having to deal with, maybe things aren't as special or as cracked up as they ought to be, and then just using Camus later on to kind of like solidify that belief, and then basically how I like came to grow past that.
I mean, to be honest, it doesn't surprise me that you would have that perspective. I mean, especially because like the finale of the novel is also a case of, I mean, he's literally shouting at a chaplain saying that God doesn't exist. And I understand that you and Louisa specifically, and other religious people that are also within here, I am a disgusting fence sitter with this one. I'm well aware of this. The I don't think it's I think it's necessarily I think that you could say, you know, because you said not to discredit, although you probably should say, you know, to discredit, because the thing is that Camus' writing in this is also in many ways to discredit your outlook also, because even though we look at Camus and say, oh, you know what, we just go with it, it's like I said earlier, it still is in opposition to things, and I think it's in relation to what Jay said about what's it called? What did Jay say earlier? Jay said something earlier, and I'm trying to remember what it was.
Don't know
Yeah,
what you-
no, wait, my thought, I broke down a bit. One sec. No, Jay said that was it. It was Jay said because he lost a bit of respect for Camus in regards of like that it was kind of he created a philosophy that in his later writings was becoming, you know, he was speaking out against certain things which was kind of antithetical to what he was originally writing, and I think that that's inherently going to happen when you officially create a philosophy. It's going to become inherently contradictory because life is too complex for that anyway. And I think that he's going to end up, yeah, this idea that okay, just go with it, everything will be fine, everything's meaningless. Eventually you're going to encounter some deep metaphysical thing in which his philosophy ultimately won't be able to stand up to, because no philosophy is completely applicable across the board. It's why even, you know, a theology, a religion, you're going to encounter a crisis of faith, because if we did find something that had all the answers that we could comfortably find solace in, then we would all go for it, and all of our answers would be squashed. Everything that we doubted before, it would be solved. I tend to look away from the chat while I'm speaking, because otherwise I get distracted when I'm seeing everyone spelling mogged towards me. Everyone's just calling me out, but that's fine. Look at this. Look at all this. Look at all this shit now that people have done.
Oh, hey, Lewis, look at me.
Listen, guys, I really appreciated the conversation. I really liked it. I think these are great. I'm liking these more and more. Yes,
Book club.
yes, Mo, I do notice you. Again, if anyone else has anything to say, now is your chance. But if not, we can just shoot over to the what's it, hangout, and I'll just shoot the shit for a little bit. We're gonna be here for a little bit. I'm gonna be here for a little bit anyway. I won't be here for too long because
We're starving.
we're gonna go have some food in that after. But thanks, guys. Again, shouts out to Esteban for recording it like he always does. Thanks to everyone here. Thanks to everyone that just came to listen. Great success.
Great success.
Let's jump over to the Patreon hangout, guys, and we can all just chill there for a bit.